This is an AVNation special. My name is Tom Albright. I am your host this morning. If you were in the States at least, you woke up to the news that Legrand had purchased, or is purchasing rather, Milestone AV. This according to their press release, Legrand's press release at least. Legrand is, purchasing Milestone AV Technologies, a front runner in audio video infrastructure and power, a high value segment of the digital infrastructure market. The deal is worth not $950 million. The products and the companies that Milestone, it's actually going to be easier to tell you what Milestone owns and runs rather than Legrand, is you're looking at Sanus, you're looking at Projecta, Vadio, Daylight, and Chief. Three of the five of those primarily in the States and beyond. The other two are primarily European and Middle Eastern products. To talk about this, a couple folks actually, we've got George Tucker, Bradford Ben, and Bill O'Donnell. Talk about the AV side. First, though, I want to bring a gentleman up by the name of Ari Fuchs. Ari is works for a company called the DAC Group, and not for nothing, but he works in money and talks about M&As all the time. So Ari, first and foremost, thank you for joining us. And secondly, what does this mean?
So that's a good question. I think, the transaction that we're seeing is kind of indicative of the overall M&A market. The market has been very active of late, certainly over the last several years, driven for many reasons. I think the two primary reasons: very strong corporate balance sheets, and I think substantial private equity dry powder available. And I think the commercial integration industry has certainly shared in that trend. Underlying themes have really been consolidation and growth. You look at kind of consolidation in the services side of the industry, that's been rampant over the last several years. Most recently Diversified and CompView, and look at Ford AV and Audio Video Resources, just to name a few.
Yeah.
But I think we're also seeing buyers from outside the marketplace making acquisitions to get a piece of the this red hot AV market. I think this Legrand and Milestone acquisition is exactly that. You look at Legrand, they've made a substantial name for themselves in the low voltage electrical IT and data communications market, and they look at Milestone as having substantial synergies. Looking at their AV hardware business, looking at their distributor relationships as highly complementary, and I think that to me was a significant catalyst to that transaction.
So you said that the AV market is red hot. Why is that? And I'm not saying that I'm not trying to be contrarian. I'm simply saying, as folks who live and breathe this on a daily basis, it seems like over the last, let's say 2 or 3 years, investment firms, to pick on one group, has suddenly discovered the audio video industry and has started picking them up and at least started to court certain integrators and manufacturers. Why are suddenly we hot?
I think you look at consolidation in the industry, which I think is happening. I think the shortening of refresh cycles among enterprise users, driven by a millennial economy, is creating opportunity for businesses, some of which are able to address, some of which don't necessarily have the sophisticated resources internally to be able to address, and that's creating opportunity for consolidation. I think you're looking at kind of the strategic buyer marketplace. We're in a relatively slow growth market, and given the seismic shift in the AV industry over the last 5 to 10 years, it is becoming substantially more high growth than it ever was, and that's drawing corporate buyers into the marketplace for no other reason is to kind of take a piece of this. And I think we're seeing this, as I mentioned, from buyers from within the industry looking to consolidate, buyers from outside the industry, i.e. low voltage and mechanical and the like, looking to get a piece of the action over here to kind of to help diversify their service offerings. And on the private equity side, the consolidation roll-up opportunity is exactly what they're looking for. That's private equity modus operandi.
Is it something though that we can at least take and not put a feather in our own cap as an industry? Say, these are folks who they're looking to make money, right? So it's not the doom and gloom that we had, let's say 7-8 years ago, where there were some people that saying that writing the death knell of the audio video industry. Is it a good sign, a sign of health and growth for our industry?
I think you're absolutely correct. It is a really good sign, and it's indicative of, I think, what certainly the next 24 to 36 months, if not longer, will look like. There is going to be substantial appetite. I think we're going to see a lot more consolidation transactions announced over the coming year and a half, and I think it only bodes well for for those in the industry. And I think by the same token, those that maybe those business owners that may be up in age, where they may be contemplating a sale transaction, now is the perfect time. You have the intersection of the industry, the marketplace, and that those types of phenomenons don't come along very frequently.
All right, very good. Ari Fuchs from the DAC Group. I appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you.
All right, now we talked about the money. Now let's talk about the AV and the folks involved. To talk about that very thing, Mr. George Tucker, the left-hand side of my brain. How are you, sir?
I am good. Good to see you again.
Good. Mr. Bradford Ben from Harman. His opinions are his own, but he's been through one or two of these acquisitions. How are you, sir?
Doing well, thanks. Thank you for making sure everyone knows I'm speaking for myself, not for the company in any way, shape, or form.
Yes, but you have some insight, at least, into how some of these in the past have gone. So
yes, agreed. I've gone through way too many of them.
Bill O'Donnell, tech manager from New Jersey. How are you, sir?
Hello, Tim. How are you doing?
And the place I saw this first, and God bless him for staying up and having a cup of coffee with us, Mr. Adrian Cottrell from the Daily Dew. How are you, sir? He's muted. I love live radio.
We'll fix that in post.
We'll fix that in post. Yeah, Adrian's muted. You fix that, Adrian. One quick thing before we move on, we are doing this live on YouTube. If you want to comment or ask questions of my fine guests, don't ask me anything. I don't know anything. That's why I have people. Bradford, first and foremost on this, as a Milestone and Legrand employee, kind of walk me through what the next couple of months is going to look like.
Okay, so this is something I'm very familiar with because I've gone through this
on
now.
Both sides.
On both sides. So the first thing is you're going to have a week or two of every industry person you know asking you, so what's this mean? Does this mean I can buy Chief through my Middle Atlantic rep? Does this mean I can buy Sanus through, or from a Milestone company, can I buy Middle Atlantic and Legrand screws, ducts? That's going to be the first question. Then, and for the most part, none of us know. That's part of the huge process that comes on. Then comes the next question that's usually addressed is what's happening with distribution. So how's it being sold? How's it being sold? Who's the distribution channels? Is it reps? Is it distributors? All that type of stuff. Then comes some of the nitty gritty, and some of this is already alluded to in the press release. Now comes the awkward, well, do we need 2 complete HR departments? Do we need 2 complete finance departments? Are you being run as a wholly owned subsidiary with your own profits and loss, or are you actually integrated into the parent company? So that's a very large question. To be honest, it's a little bit stressful time for a lot of the employees of going, well, what's next? Will there be a salesperson for Middle Atlantic and then a separate salesperson for all the Chief brands? Starts to be those questions. Yeah. So those are difficult questions to ask. Now, one of the things that's nice is that they have very complementary products. And the plan that Legrand has put out is that they're going to bring them together into the AV unit of Legrand. It's going to become one company. That's already been outlined in their press releases and their forward-looking plans. So at least people know, which is great to know, because sometimes not knowing is very challenging. After that, there's a whole lot of internal things that go on about, what's vacation time, which email, all that stuff. That's not going to impact most of our listeners, so I'm not going to go into that. What is going to get expected is you will have some changeover in ordering processes and who you talk with and if your credit's joined and all of those things. And that is typically, I would say, don't think it's going to get changed like in 30 days. It's probably going to be 90 to 180 days before all that gets integrated in. And it could be longer if they're going to one master package that does everything, like an SAP, which is a manufacturing as well as ordering tool. So that's the big thing. I would say that you probably won't see any large change until the next trade show, the next major trade show being ISE. But for the most part, it's going to be a lot of changes, and what worked one day didn't work the next day. Trying to figure out who your counterparts are, and as a manufacturer person and as an integrator, what I would say is call the people you've always been calling, and they'll tell you if it's the right or wrong. The other thing I say to most people is change is constant except from vending machines. After a while, you just get used to this process. I tell people all I do is I put my head down, I show up, I see what happens, I go home, repeat the next day. It's going to be a roller coaster ride for all involved. There'll be days where products can't ship. So talking with your reps is going to be important of, hey, I have this project. Will this be a problem? And that's just good practice for any large project. But now with all these changes, it becomes more important. To be honest, if it's done well, there should be nothing to the customer other than the purchase order process. And I do think the first thing that's going to happen once they decide what their sales channel is going to be, is they're either going to decide their single sales channel or multiple sales channels, and then it'll be, is this a brand A project or a brand B project, and who takes the lead, and how do you cross-pollinate, like I've been doing of, I have Crown, let me show you BSS. It's the, I have Middle Atlantic Rex, oh, let me show you a Chief mount. Or, oh, you're doing this Chief mount, what are you putting all your equipment in? Let me put in Middle Atlantic stuff. That's going to be at least a 90-day process for people just to learn all the part numbers.
Well, even more than that, because I mean, even the press release was even referencing over 5,000 SKUs. You think 90 days is enough?
Well, so the SKUs, stock keeping units, for those of you who aren't familiar, that 5,000 might not be as big as you think.
Okay.
So the reason I say that, like for instance, on the SoundWeb London family of products within Harman, we have the 800 series. There's the 800, the 805, the 806. All have the basic features. The only thing that's different is which transport they're using. AVB, CobraNet, or Dante/AES67. That's 3 SKUs, but in reality, it's one product to know.
Okay.
And then there's other things like a Middle Atlantic rack, and I'm using this as a bad example. It's the last digit is how many rack spaces it is. So if it's a -24, it's 24 rack spaces. -48, it's 48 rack spaces.
And those are
Same
2 different
product.
SKUs.
2 different SKUs because you have to build them differently. So that's why the numbers don't scare me because of how stock keeping units are put together.
All right, let's continue on this, and I should have mentioned this at the top of the hour. One thing that's interesting for us here at AVNation and in covering this story is we have four underwriters as part of this entire deal. The entirety of Milestone, Vadio, Chief, as well as Daylight are all underwriters, as well as Middle Atlantic on the Legrand side. The one thing I will comment on Bradford before we get to George, in talking with the various folks at Legrand, yes, it's under one big corporation. I'm not saying they're autonomous, but they're pretty individualized, right? Yes, they're all in one booth, and that's going to be. I'm going to bring George in on this to talk about this. Bradford mentioned the fact that the next significant trade show for all of these properties involved is ISE. Yes, we have CEDIA, and yes, we have a couple of regional shows, but the next significant one for everybody on this press release is going to be Integrated Systems Europe in 2018, the 1st of February. George, when you're talking about bringing all of these folks under one booth, you worked for a manufacturer for a long time, in charge of their booth. You've been inside Milestone's booth a number of times for us. Talk about the logistics of bringing all those folks together in one spot for a trade show.
Well, first of all, I wasn't in charge of the booth. I was part of it, and I like to say it was an integral part of it.
A long time ago, and nobody's there that can.
Yeah, well, let's be just clear. In all honesty, let's be clear. Well, first of all, the overlapping products could be a problem, and that's my first concern. Nobody mentioned anything about the fact that, well, Middle Atlantic does make display mounts.
Yep,
and they have Chief, and they have I forget how to say it, Sonos under Milestone. What happens there? I mean, are we in a situation where, like Google, they sort of defer to one, or don't they? That gives me a bit of pause. As to getting everybody together, it really becomes we are one company, as Bradford said, and you just sort of accommodate where that overlap is and who is handling what part of it. Yes, you have to learn the new SKUs to be able to say, oh, you're doing this. Here is a solution that involves our X product that also works with these products over here. It's not really a huge leap of knowledge or even faith, as it were, for the salespeople and representatives to do. You're just learning new SKUs as if it were your own. So I don't have a concern about that. My concern really is about where do the Middle Atlantic display mounts go and where do the Chief and Sonos go?
Mr. Bradford, what you had a comment there about the multiple mounts thing?
Yeah, the multiple mounts, and because Harman's gone through this. I've gone through this. I'm just speaking from experience. What would typically happen is you look for who's the expert or the brand leader or, what they're focused on. And, for instance, if you look at way back when BSS had a brand called C Audio, and then they bought Crown. Well, the C Audio products got brought under the Crown products and then eventually just got folded into Crown because Crown was the amplifier. So, for instance, with the mounts, I'm not saying this is what they're going to do, but I wouldn't be surprised if they keep both models, all the model SKUs, but put them all under Chief because Chief is a mounting company first, whereas Middle Atlantic's reputation, not saying it's what they are, is for racks and furniture. So they'll leverage that type of stuff. And this goes on and on across all sorts of brands like AMX by SVSI. You can go through all this stuff. Is who's your area of expertise and let that person lead. And it is a back and forth option between them. Same things happen with Crown microphones being part of AKG now. AKG is the microphone company, Crown's the amp company. So those things are not insurmountable, but you just have to sit down and go through them. And if not, the other option is to do a conversion sheet for your salespeople. So that if someone goes, this was the part I used to use, here's the new part. So it's a straight through replace.
And
so that can be managed.
You're talking about what would be today competing products between the two brands.
Right. Like, for instance, and I don't claim to know the products, but a 47-inch display mount from Chief and a 47-inch display mount from Middle Atlantic are probably, can be interchanged. And if they decide that the Middle Atlantic piece is going away, they would probably give you a piece of paper that says the Middle Atlantic 47-inch mount has a direct replacement, which is the Chief 47-inch mount. The idea being is it makes it as transparent as possible. And like I said, I'm not saying anyone's going away. These are purely my opinions, but just talking from example of being able to do a direct replacement is a key thing that they're probably going to do.
All right, Bill. As a tech manager and as somebody who not only specs this stuff but also helps put it in, and you were kind of the last line here. As we sit here and you use both of these companies' products, how is this going to impact, or how do you think is going to impact you? Come you're in the middle of summer, you work for a college, you're already in the middle of this, but let's say next summer when you start designing your refreshes and your new rooms.
So that's the thing. If anything, Bradford's spot on kind of with how I think this is going to end up rumbling out, because you have both Middle Atlantic and Chief, who are both kind of getting into things. Chief at one point had Raxus. I think a lot of it's going to kind of start to settle out. You're going to see things, at least for us, we've always known Chief to use. We've used Chief for like projector mounts and display mounts and everything. It's just because that's what they do. On the flip side of it, yeah, if anything, I don't think there's going to be such a huge change. However, it wouldn't surprise me if you started seeing certain product lines having things built in. Like our big one, we use a ton, and I do mean a ton, of like the Chief pack boxes. Now, previously, Chief had a partnership with Surgex. Wouldn't surprise me if all of a sudden, instead of having your Surgex outlets built in, you'll probably have a Middle Atlantic equivalent already put in, because when it comes to rack equipment and power distribution and things like that, yeah, we've always kind of standardized with Middle Atlantic. So there'll be some things that'll change, but I think you'll start to see some of the stuff kind of integrated a little bit further. And I don't know, it wouldn't surprise me if it kind of turned into a one-stop shop for things. So.
All right. Actually, let's go back to George for a second here. When it comes to integrating, George is now an integrator. How big of a deal is this transition? Bradford has already talked to it, where if you order, go back and pick on Middle Atlantic for a second. You order a Middle Atlantic display mount, and you go to order it, and either you're not paying attention, or you're just trying to do your job and work through the day. You get a piece of paper that says, "Hey, this is now a Chief mount. Can you order that?" Or we're just sending you that. How big of a deal is that when it comes to project management and just getting this stuff done and put up and integrated?
In the short term, it's really just a small bump. I mean, it can seem daunting at first. But my bigger concern is about brand loyalty. I mean, there is a lot of that in this industry, where we really are very specific about why we choose who we choose, not just for the quality and for the variety and for the features that are in certain things. And those are really important, but we do really build relationships. We talk about this at the trade shows all the time, where certain things are not revolutionary, they're evolutionary. But we're there to talk to the people who provide us with solutions. So that loyalty and that communication set is really what's there. And that can be the difficult transition. As long as some of those core people are still there, I think it becomes okay, who do I talk to? Can I still talk to Joe? Oh, it's John. Well, I'm going to talk to Joe and John at first and figure out where this goes and set that trust up. Learning the new SKUs, so long as they're compatible with what I need to do, it's fine. If one doesn't have a back box access where I can put my say power controller and the other one does, and they replace it with the one that doesn't, that causes me grief. But in the end, I want a single solution. Again, what Milestone and Legrand and buying all this together is a single-ended solution place. It's not an ecosystem, but it is an ecosystem. It's where can I go to get everything I need and have the common set of tools and people that will help me guide through it. And that's remarkable. The transition will be just slightly bumpy. The other, again, is trust and relationship. Will it continue, and how do I transition into that? That's their play.
Bradford, there was a common thread that came out of InfoComm just 2 weeks ago, actually. And that is the one company to blame. Some people use the term one throat to choke, but I tend to steer clear of that. Is there something to that? I mean, Legrand is a publicly traded company, and we've had this conversation before. We had it when Samsung purchased Harman, right? There are a couple different avenues for growth. One is you grow organically. The other way is you buy companies, and this is something that Legrand has done over the last couple of years. But is there something to that? Is there something substantive where Bill O'Donnell or George or folks who cover this industry can look at that whole one company to put all your chips and your eggs in one basket, to overuse a phrase? Is that a legitimate sales tactic, or is it simply, we're a big company and we want you to come to us for everything?
So there's a little bit of a big company come to us, and there's a little bit of a successful system with one point person who can guide you through it. I was joking earlier, I forget with who, it might have been you, Tim, you can now cut 2 POs and get an entire audio, video, lighting, and control system. All the mounting hardware, all of the physical infrastructure, and the cabling can all come from Legrand. All of the audio equipment, video equipment, lighting, and loudspeakers can all come from Harman, and poof, you're done. Now, we all are realistic and realize that's not going to happen, but I also see the advantage for the customer. There's the first one, which is, since the vast majority of us are coin operated, they can cut one purchase order, which has a lower cost. So instead of cutting 7 purchase orders to all the different brands, they cut one. Lowers your overhead costs. Seems like it's a small thing, but there are times where cutting a PO is between $50 to $75 each one. So, you know, if you can go from 7 to 1, you just saved $300, actually more than $300. You saved almost $900. So that becomes a big thing. The other thing is things will work together better, is because we can share experiences. For instance, making sure that AES-67 flows between SVSI and the BSS and Crown products. Well, we have all sorts of audio networking knowledge that we were able to show with SVSI. So we can say, yes, these are interoperable, which people want. And that's the one throat to choke, is the I call you, you make my system go. So I do think there is some benefit to that, of everything's going to fit together and everything's going to work together. You know, there's lots of benefits to that, of you can share the knowledge. And I'm not going to use the S buzzword. I'm going to share the joy and share the knowledge of working on these projects. I'm sure Cables to Go has information about bend radiuses and how difficult that can be and ways to improve it that they can share with Middle Atlantic for such things as, you know, do you put a strain relief on a rack shelf? And then they can also share that with Chief, looking at what's the best way to be able to run a cable to be able to go into their cable management system.
Yeah.
So that the sum of the overall whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
All right, so let's get another tech manager on here and ask that last question here. And Bill, you're going to wrap this up here. When I was a tech manager, and even when I moved from that to designing systems, I simply wanted the system to work, and I'll give Bradford absolutely credit on that one. However, sometimes the one company did not provide all the system that worked. Yes, your system is a little bit better integrated and tested, you know, in the shop and in your factory. But sometimes that one little widget, that one piece, was not quite as good as this one over here. Bill, as the resident tech manager and customer here, is that what you want? Is that you want one point person?
It works well if you have one throat to choke, but you know, it all kind of depends in that, you know, hey, you play in this one sandbox, we'll take care of it. Well, you know, I'll say this, with every manufacturer, there are always things that they make really well, and then there's some other things where you look and you go, it's kind of got to go back into the oven. But I get it from where they're coming from, and specifically in Legrand's case, I mean, God, they're just pushing everything through. Whereas, like, if you're coming from a technology or an IT person, like, they are really kind of becoming the turnkey solution for all your infrastructure needs. At this point, I'm wondering if Cables to Go doesn't have a fiber optic division. If not, it wouldn't surprise me if they suddenly randomly bought that off of Corning. But you know, it's good in the fact of, okay, and like Bradford said, you know, instead of cutting 2 or 3 POs, it's cutting one, and it's straight from the manufacturer. And I won't lie, in our case, we're right in Middle Atlantic's backyard, and Legrand has kind of shoved all of their product lines into that factory over there for any additional storage space. So it's kind of nice actually having that stuff that close by. So it's being able to say, yeah, I have everything you need, and yeah, you're right. It's how you build relationships with that.
All right, guys. That's going to do it. We're having some technical difficulties with internet over in England, so we will get Mr. Cottrell on at another time to talk about this. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Mr. Tucker, how do people get a hold of you?
Oops, sorry about that. They can find me at Tucker2s on most social media. I write for various trade magazines as well as here at AVNation.
All right. Mr. O'Donnell, how do people find you?
You can find me at the original OD on various forms of social media. You can find my writings on AV Technology magazine. And yeah.
All right, very good. Ari Fuchs is actually still with us. Ari, how do people find you or the DAC group if they want?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I am on Twitter, and we are active thought content contributors. Would love to talk to any of your listeners and viewers to see if we can help.
All right, very good. And last but not least, Mr. Bradford Penn, how do people find you and your personal opinions?
My personal opinions and all that good stuff can be found at avnation.tv. Just look at Bradford Ben or My Brain Balloons, one of which will be publishing on Thursday the 29th, talking about this exact subject. You can go to bradfordben.com. I'm on the vast majority of social networks, although I'm antisocial, at Bradford Ben with 2 N's. If you want to talk with me about work, always happy to talk about that. That's bradford.ben@harman.com, and it's 2 A's, just not together for Harman. And of course, don't follow me though. Go to avnation.tv, see all the content we're doing and all the little tweaky stuff I'm doing behind the scenes to make the website more usable and better. And you can even click on the EdTech podcast and be able to hear Mr. Bill O'Donnell spout all about education and technology, which is where I learned most of my stuff.
You can.
Hooray!
Yeah, all that is at AVNation, avnation.tv, avnation.tv. When you're there, check out our underwriters. As I mentioned at the top of this hour, this story has about 4 of our underwriters. These are folks that help us and support us and allow us to do the things that we do, including bring you Infocom and CDN in the next couple of weeks, New York Digital Signage Week, which I'll be hanging out with Adrian and the guys at Daily Do. And then ISE 2018, which will be coming up before we all know it. So all that is at avnation.tv, avnation.tv. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. This has been an AVNation special.